You're only 12 years old when your parents sell you to a stranger to secure a powerful alliance. Tomorrow is your wedding, but it isn't a celebration. It's a transaction. On your wedding night, nobles will gather to watch as you're forced into bed, proof of consummation paraded before the court like a prize. If you survive the brutal childbirth that follows, congratulations, you now belong to a husband who can legally beat or even kill you. Welcome to medieval marriage, where love was a fairy tale, and survival was the only vow that mattered. Section 1. The Bargain. The torches burned low in the hall of Harrowmore Keep, their smoke curling upward into the dark beams above. Elise crouched beneath the great table, clutching the ragged hem of her nightdress. She had learned long ago that adults spoke freely when they thought no one was listening. "You've no choice, Lord Halden," a stranger's voice said, sharp and cold. "The war has drained your coffers, and your enemies circle like vultures. My son will wed your daughter, and in exchange, you will receive 200 gold marks and the protection of House Carowin." Elise's father, stern, broad-shouldered, a man who ruled his household with a growl, sounded different tonight. Defeated. "She is only 11 summers old," he muttered. "Too young even to understand what marriage means." The stranger's laughter was soft and cruel. "Marriage is not for her to understand. It is for men to arrange. She will grow into her duties soon enough." Elise's small fingers dug into the splintered wood. She didn't fully grasp the words, but she understood enough. They were speaking of her. Her mother's voice came next, brittle with desperation. Perhaps we could delay the wedding a year or two. Let her." "No," the stranger interrupted. "The contract must be sealed now. If you do not sign tonight, my offer vanishes. And when your enemies march upon these gates, do not expect House Carowin to aid you." There was a pause. Elise peeked through a crack between the table planks and saw her father standing rigid, jaw clenched. At last he said the words that would change her life forever. "Fetch the ink. I will sign." Her mother gave a small, broken sob. Elise's heart pounded in her chest. She didn't fully understand what was happening, only that something precious was being stolen from her, and no one was stopping it. Section 2. The Announcement. The next morning, Elise was summoned to the solar. Her mother, Lady Rowena, stood by the window with red-rimmed eyes. Her father loomed by the hearth, his heavy cloak draped like a shadow over his broad frame. Between them stood a man Elise had never seen before, pale, thin, and dressed in dark velvet trimmed with silver thread. "Come here, child," Lord Halden said, his tone curt. Elise obeyed, her bare feet silent on the cold flagstones. She bowed her head as she'd been taught, though her throat felt tight. "This is Lord Cashin of House Carowin," her father said. "His son Alaric will be your future husband." Elise's stomach flipped. Husband. The word felt like a foreign stone in her mouth. She glanced at the stranger, who smiled thinly, like a wolf pretending to be tame. "But, father," Elise whispered, clutching the fabric of her tunic, "I don't wish to marry. I'm not even grown." Lord Halden's eyes hardened. "Wishes are for peasants and poets. You are a daughter of Harrowmore. Your marriage will secure our lands and protect our people." Lady Rowena knelt beside her, taking her hands. "Sweeting," she murmured, "it is decided. You will be well cared for, I promise." Her voice trembled on the last word. Lord Cashin stepped forward, inspecting Elise like a merchant appraising livestock. "She's small for her age," he said flatly. "But the bloodline is strong. She will bear sons when the time comes." Heat flooded Elise's cheeks. Bear sons? She barely understood what that meant, but the tone made her want to run and hide. "No," she blurted, shaking her head wildly. "I won't go. I'll stay here with Mother." Lord Halden's hand cracked across her cheek. The sound echoed through the chamber. "You will go," he said in a voice like iron. "You will obey. For the sake of this house." Elise stumbled back, clutching her face, tears streaming down. Lady Rowena reached for her, but Halden's glare froze her in place. Lord Cashin smiled again, faintly amused by the scene. She will learn, he said, drawing a rolled parchment from his cloak. The betrothal is sealed by this contract. The wedding will take place in 2 months' time. 2 months. Elise's mind reeled. 2 months until she was bound to a stranger forever. That night she huddled in her bed beneath her tattered quilt, listening to the winter wind howl against the shutters. She whispered to her favorite doll, a threadbare rabbit named Willow. "They can't make me," she said, voice trembling. "I'll run away. I'll hide in the stables. They'll never find me." But deep down, Elise knew the truth. There was no escaping her father's will, or the claws of House Carowan. Section 3. The Betrothed. The day Alaric arrived was bitterly cold. Snowflakes drifted through the gray sky, settling on the stone battlements like pale lashes. Elise watched from an upper window as a column of riders approached the keep, their banners snapping in the wind. Black silk emblazoned with a silver raven, the sigil of House Carowan. Her heart thudded painfully in her chest. Somewhere among those riders was the boy who would soon be her husband. The gates creaked open, and the party rode into the courtyard. At their head was a youth clad in dark mail and a heavy fur cloak. He dismounted with the smooth grace of someone who had been trained from birth to command. Even from a distance, Elise could see his sharp features and cold, assessing gaze. "That must be him," she whispered. Lady Rowena appeared at her side, her face pale. "Yes, that is Alaric." She placed trembling hands on Elise's shoulders. "Remember your courtesies, sweeting. Smile. Speak gently. Whatever you feel, hide it deep inside." Elise nodded mutely, though her insides twisted. The great hall was ablaze with torches when they met. Alaric stood beside his father, Lord Cashin, both dressed in black and silver. Lord Haldan greeted them warmly, his voice booming across the hall, but Elise noticed the tension in his jaw, the unease beneath his show of hospitality. When it was her turn, Elise stepped forward and curtsied, her knees quivering. "My lord," she said, barely above a whisper. Alaric's gaze swept over her, sharp and impersonal. He was 15, perhaps 16, only a few years older than her, yet he seemed far more adult. His expression did not soften. "You are smaller than I expected," he said flatly. Heat flared in Elise's face. I am nearly 12. A faint smirk tugged at his mouth. "Nearly." Lord Haldan cleared his throat sharply. "Elise, why don't you show your betrothed the gardens?" The word betrothed struck Elise like a stone. She wanted to scream that she was no one's betrothed, that she would rather leap from the battlements than walk arm in arm with this cold-eyed boy. But her father's command was absolute. The gardens were withered beneath the frost, the bare branches like skeletal fingers. Alaric walked ahead of her, his stride purposeful. Elise trotted to keep up, hugging her cloak tight. "You are quiet," he remarked at last, glancing back. "I have little to say, my lord." "You will address me as Alaric," he said sharply. "When we are wed, you will obey me in all things." Elise bit her lip, tasting blood. "And if I do not wish to obey?" He turned to face her, his pale eyes gleaming with amusement, and something darker. "Then you will learn obedience," he said simply. "It is better for you if you do." A shiver ran down her spine. This was not a boy who would offer kindness. He spoke like one already accustomed to power, to having others bend beneath his will. Do you wish to marry me?" Elise asked, the question trembling from her lips. Alaric's smirk returned. "What I wish is irrelevant. Our fathers have made their bargain. We are pieces on their board. Pieces." The word echoed in Elise's mind like a tolling bell. She realized, with cold clarity, that she was no longer a child, no longer a person in her own right. She was a pawn, bought and sold to cement an alliance she did not understand. As they returned to the hall, Alaric reached out and gripped her wrist, not painfully, but with a possessive firmness that made her heart pound. "You belong to me now," he said softly, almost tenderly. "Remember that." Elise nodded, though inside she vowed to never forget, not because she accepted it, but because one day she might find a way to break free. Section 4. The Weight of Tradition. The keep transformed over the following weeks. Where once it had been a cold, drafty fortress, it now bustled with servants carrying bolts of silk, barrels of wine, and platters of sugared fruits. Musicians arrived from distant towns, their lutes and flutes filling the corridors with music that sounded far too joyful for Elise's mood. Her wedding dress was delivered in a carved chest lined with cedar shavings. The gown was heavy, stitched with pearls and silver thread, its train so long that 2 attendants would need to carry it as she walked. Lady Rowena oversaw every detail, her face set in a mask of composure. "You must look perfect," she told Elise, smoothing her hair with trembling hands. "The future of Harrowmore depends on it. If Lord Cashin is displeased, he might break the alliance." Elise sat stiffly as servants measured her arms and waist, her mind buzzing with questions she dared not ask aloud. Why must I please him? Why does no one care what I want? One evening, she overheard 2 maids whispering in the kitchens. "They say Lord Alaric is cruel," one murmured, glancing around nervously. "His last betrothed died mysteriously before they wed. Fell from a tower, they claim." The other maid crossed herself. "Perhaps she jumped rather than marry him." Their laughter was bitter and low, and Elise fled before she could hear more. The night before the wedding, Elise was summoned to the chapel. There she found her father kneeling before the altar, his broad shoulders bowed. When he rose, his face was unreadable. "Come here," he said. She obeyed, her small hands clasped tightly. "This marriage will save our house," Lord Halden said, his voice heavy. "You may not understand now, but one day you will. Our people depend on this alliance. If Harrowmore falls, hundreds will suffer." "But why me?" Elise's voice cracked. "Why must I be the sacrifice?" His expression softened for a heartbeat, then hardened again. "Because you were born a daughter. That is your duty." Tears stung her eyes. "I don't want this." "You think I wanted this?" His voice rose, echoing off the chapel's stone walls. "I do what must be done. As will you." He turned away, signaling that the conversation was over. Elise left the chapel numb, her hope flickering like a candle guttering in the wind. The morning of the wedding dawned pale and cold. Snow drifted over the courtyard as bells tolled from the chapel tower. Elise's attendants dressed her in silence, fastening the heavy gown, arranging her hair in intricate braids. When they placed the silver circlet upon her head, she felt less like a bride and more like a prisoner being crowned for execution. Lady Rowena kissed her daughter's forehead, tears slipping free despite her best efforts. "Be brave, my little bird," she whispered. "Endure this day, and perhaps you will find happiness in time." But Elise saw the lie in her mother's eyes. There would be no happiness, only survival. As the chapel doors opened and the crowd turned to watch her walk the aisle, Elise forced her trembling legs to move. At the altar stood Alaric, tall and composed, his expression unreadable. Lord Cashin loomed behind him, smiling like a man who had just won a game of dice. When the priest intoned the vows, Elise's voice shook so badly she could barely speak. "I do," she whispered, sealing her fate. Alaric's grip on her hand was cold and unyielding as iron shackles. Section 5. The Bedding Ceremony. The feast after the ceremony seemed to stretch on forever. The great hall was stifling with heat and noise, the air thick with the smell of roasted boar and spilled wine. Nobles laughed and shouted over the music, toasting the newlyweds as if Elise's life had not just been traded away like a sack of coin. Elise sat beside Alaric at the high table, barely touching her food. Every time she tried to raise a goblet to her lips, her hands shook so violently that wine sloshed over the rim. Alaric noticed, of course. "Compose yourself," he muttered, his voice low and sharp. "Our guests are watching." Elise forced her trembling to still, her jaw clenched. Across the hall, Lord Cashin's cold gaze followed her every move, while her father avoided meeting her eyes entirely. When the final course was cleared, A hush fell over the hall. Elise's heart plummeted. She had been dreading this moment all day, the bedding ceremony. The priest rose, lifting his hands. "It is time," he proclaimed, his voice echoing against the stone walls. "Let the marriage be sealed in the sight of God and man." A roar of cheers erupted. Elise's vision swam. Two women approached her, Alaric's female cousins, their smiles sharp as knives. "Come, dear bride," one said mockingly. "It is tradition." They seized Elise by the arms and all but dragged her from the table. The men did the same to Alaric, who went willingly, smirking at Elise over his shoulder. The bridal chamber was prepared like a stage. The great bed was draped with crimson curtains, strewn with flowers and perfumed herbs. Candles flickered in every corner, casting too bright light on the gathered crowd. Elise froze in the doorway, her breath coming in shallow gasps. They'll all see," she whispered. The older cousin laughed. "Not quite, little dove. The curtains will be drawn. We merely stay to ensure the marriage is properly completed." Alaric stepped forward, his expression calm, almost bored. "Undress her." Elise's stomach lurched. "No!" She struggled as the women reached for her, clutching at her heavy gown. "Please don't!" "Hold still," one snapped, yanking the fabric so roughly that pearls scattered across the floor. "It is the custom." The room spun. Elise's tears blurred the faces around her as her wedding clothes were stripped away piece by piece, leaving her in only a thin linen shift. Laughter rippled through the crowd at her sobs. "Beautiful," someone murmured, as if she were a prize horse. When they were finished, Elise was shoved toward the bed. Alaric entered a moment later, stripped to his own linen, his pale skin gleaming in the candlelight. His smirk had returned. The priest stepped forward, sprinkling holy water over the bed and chanting blessings for fertility. Then, with a flourish, he gestured for the curtains to be drawn. "May this union be fruitful and strong," he declared. The guests erupted into cheers, throwing stockings and garters toward the bed like drunken celebrants. One hit Elise in the face, the wool scratching her cheek. "Enough!" Alaric barked, his voice cutting through the noise. "Leave us!" Reluctantly, the crowd began to file out, though many lingered just beyond the curtains, eager for proof of consummation. Elise curled in on herself, trembling. Please," she whispered. Don't hurt me." Alaric studied her, his expression unreadable. Then, slowly, he reached out and gripped her chin, forcing her to meet his gaze. "You are mine now," he said softly. "You will obey me, Elise, whether you wish to or not." Her heart pounded so hard she thought it might burst. Outside the curtains, laughter and whispers rose, mingled with the clinking of goblets. Inside, Elise's childhood ended in silence and tears. Section 6. The morning after. When Elise woke, the candles had burned to stubs, and the room smelled of extinguished smoke and sweat. Her body ached in ways she couldn't name. She lay perfectly still beneath the tangled sheets, staring at the canopy above, her mind blank. If she didn't move, perhaps it would all vanish. Last night, the crowd, Alaric's cold hands, the words whispered in the dark. But reality didn't vanish. It pressed down on her like the heavy furs covering the bed. Beside her, Alaric slept sprawled on his stomach, breathing evenly, as if the night had been nothing more than a routine duty. His pale back rose and fell with each breath, a stark contrast to the storm raging inside Elise. She turned her face into the pillow and sobbed silently. She had heard whispers from the older maids about what happened between husband and wife, but nothing could have prepared her for the fear, the humiliation, the pain. A sharp knock rattled the door. Elise flinched. "My lord, my lady," a voice called. It was one of Alaric's cousins, her tone falsely sweet. "The lords await confirmation." Alaric groaned, rubbing his eyes. "Enter." The door creaked open, and the cousin swept in, followed by two older women carrying linens. Elise sat up, clutching the sheets to her chest, horrified. "It is tradition," the cousin said, almost gleeful. "Proof must be shown." Elise didn't understand until the women pulled back the bedding, exposing the soiled sheets to the morning light. One of them nodded approvingly. Stained, as expected. The marriage is valid. Heat flooded Elise's face. She wanted to vanish, to sink through the stone floor. Alaric, meanwhile, seemed utterly unbothered. Take it to my father, he ordered coolly. The women carried the evidence away like a sacred relic. The cousin winked at Elise before leaving, her laughter trailing behind her like a taunt. When they were finally alone, Elise whispered, Why must they see? Alaric rose, stretching lazily. Because without proof, the alliance means nothing. My father will not risk a claim that our marriage is invalid. Elise stared at him, a bitter taste rising in her mouth. I am not a prize to be won, Alaric. He turned, his pale eyes narrowing. You are exactly that. And now that prize is mine. She shrank back, but her anger flared even through her fear. One day, she whispered, I will not be. Alaric's lips curved into a chilling smile. One day? Perhaps. But until then, remember this, Elise, I hold your fate, your family's fate, in my hands. Defy me, and Harrowmore will burn. The threat hung in the air like smoke. Later that day, Elise was paraded through the hall for the formal announcement. Nobles toasted the newly sealed union, while Lord Cassion's face gleamed with triumph. Elise caught sight of her mother across the room. Lady Rowena's smile was brittle, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles were white. As Elise passed her, she whispered desperately, Mama, please take me home. Rowena's eyes filled with tears. I cannot, little bird. Your home is here now. The words shattered Elise's last fragile hope. She was truly alone. That night, when Alaric summoned her again, Elise obeyed without a word. Resistance was useless, for now. But deep inside, beneath the fear and despair, a small, cold ember of defiance began to burn. One day, she vowed silently, she would escape this gilded cage. Or die trying. Section 7, The Deadly Secret. Winter dragged on, each day colder than the last. Elise's life became a blur of duties and silent endurance. At dawn, she was expected to rise and attend the morning prayers with Alaric's family. Afterward, she sat beside Lady Maurice, Alaric's aunt, learning the endless rules of etiquette required of a lady of House Carowan. You must never speak before your husband unless addressed, Maurice instructed one frosty morning as she poured steaming tea into delicate cups. And when he does speak, you must listen. A wife's silence is a husband's honor. Elise swallowed her bitterness like poison. Yes, my lady. Maurice studied her closely. You must also be mindful of your duty. It will soon be expected of you. My duty? Elise frowned. I am already performing my wifely duties. Her voice caught at the word, shame and dread twisting her stomach. Maurice's thin lips curved into a knowing smile. Not those duties, child. I speak of heirs. Lord Cassion desires a grandson. You must provide one, and quickly. It is the only way to secure your place here. The room tilted. Elise gripped the arm of her chair. But I'm not ready, she whispered. I am only 12. 13 come spring. Maurice interrupted sharply. Many noble girls are mothers by that age. My own sister bore her first child at 14. Elise's breath came fast and shallow. She had seen the swollen bellies of village women, their weary faces as they carried buckets of water or bundles of firewood. But she had never thought of it happening to her. What if? Her voice trembled. What if I cannot survive it? Maurice's expression hardened. Then you will have died doing your duty. The line of Carowan will endure, even if you do not. That night, Elise lay awake in the dark, clutching her threadbare rabbit, Willow, to her chest. Childbirth. She had overheard the servants whisper about it, of women screaming for hours, of babies born blue and still, of mothers who bled out before the midwives could save them. She remembered the story of Lady Derissa, a cousin of Alaric's, who had died giving birth to twins the previous year. Elise had been told it was a Noble sacrifice. Now she realized it was simply death, dressed up in flowery words. When Alaric joined her in bed, Elise turned her face away. Alaric, she whispered, her voice shaking. Please. I am afraid. He sighed as though her fear were an inconvenience. Fear is weakness, Elise. My mother bore 5 children before her 20th year. You will do the same. But what if I die? Alaric's pale eyes gleamed in the darkness. Then I will take another wife. The alliance will remain, and House Carowan will grow stronger. That is all that matters. His cold certainty made Elise's blood run ice cold. To him, she was nothing but a vessel, a means to an end. Her life, or death, was irrelevant. A few days later, Elise overheard a conversation between 2 midwives in the castle kitchens. Did you hear about Lady Fenrill? One whispered. Dead at 16, poor thing. Her hips were too narrow to bear the child. They tried bloodletting, prayers, even ice packs to bring down the fever, but nothing worked. The other midwife shook her head grimly. Half the noble girls don't survive their first birth. They start too young. Their bodies aren't ready. Elise clutched the doorframe, her stomach lurching. Half don't survive. The words echoed in her skull like a funeral toll. That night she vomited until her throat burned, though she hadn't eaten. In the flickering light of a single candle, she whispered to Willow, I won't let them kill me. I won't. But how could she stop it when her very survival was the one thing no one in the castle seemed to care about? Section 8. The Shattered Future. Spring arrived with cruel swiftness. The snow melted into muddy rivers, and the hills beyond the castle walls bloomed with wildflowers. Elise, however, found no joy in the change of seasons. Her courses, which had been irregular since her first bleeding, had now stopped entirely. The old nurse, Madra, confirmed her worst fear with a grave nod. You carry a child, my lady, she said softly. May the saints protect you. Elise's knees buckled. She sank onto the edge of the bed, clutching her stomach as though she could will the tiny life inside her to disappear. No, she whispered, shaking her head violently. It's too soon. I'm not ready. I'm not ready. Madra placed a wrinkled hand on Elise's shoulder. Few ever are. When Alaric heard the news, his reaction was chillingly calm. Good, he said simply, as if she had just informed him of a successful harvest. My father will be pleased. We will announce it at the midsummer feast. Elise stared at him in disbelief. Pleased? I could die, Alaric. He tilted his head, regarding her as one might a troublesome hound. If you die, the child may yet live. That is what matters. The ember of defiance inside Elise flared into a roaring flame. You are a monster, she hissed. Alaric's hand shot out, gripping her jaw hard enough to bruise. And you are my wife, he said coldly. Remember that before you speak again. When he left, Elise collapsed onto the floor, shaking with fury and terror. She knew then that there was no salvation for her within these walls. As the months passed, Elise's body began to change. Her belly swelled, her back ached, and the nausea came in relentless waves. The midwives clucked over her, feeding her bitter herbs and muttering prayers, but Elise saw the truth in their worried glances. She was too small, too young. One stormy night, Lady Rowena managed to visit under the pretense of bringing gifts for the coming child. My poor bird, she whispered, gathering Elise into her arms. I tried to protect you, but your father. Her voice broke. Help me, Mama, Elise sobbed. Please take me away. I don't want to die here. Rowena's tears fell onto her daughter's hair. If I could, I would. But they watch you day and night. If you survive the birth, I swear I'll find a way to bring you home. The word if cut through Elise like a knife. The labor began on a sweltering summer morning. Elise's screams echoed through the stone corridors as the midwives struggled to save her. Hours stretched into a blur of agony, hands pressing on her belly, bitter herbs forced between her teeth, prayers whispered frantically over her head. At last, with a final, wrenching pain, the chamber filled with the thin, wailing cry of a newborn. "It's a boy!" someone shouted. Relief swept the room, but it was short-lived. Elise lay pale and trembling, her breath shallow. Blood soaked the linens beneath her, more than Madra had ever seen. "She's fading!" another midwife cried. "We'll lose her if we can't stop the bleeding!" Elise's vision blurred. The faces around her became smears of color and light. In her final moments of clarity, she thought of the wildflower hills, of Willow the rabbit, of her mother's warm embrace. "I just wanted to be free," she whispered. Then darkness claimed her. Section 9: The Legacy. When Elise awoke days later, she was shocked to find herself alive. Madra sat beside her bed, exhaustion etched into every line of her face. "You are stronger than we thought, my lady," she said softly. "You nearly crossed to the other side." Elise's body was broken, but her spirit burned with a strange, fierce clarity. She gazed at the small cradle where her newborn son slept peacefully. Alaric entered, his expression smug. "You have done well," he said. "Our heir is strong. Now rest, for you will bear me more children." Elise met his gaze, her own eyes cold as winter ice. "Never," she whispered. Alaric's smirk faltered. "What did you say?" "Never again." Her voice was steady now, filled with a quiet strength that terrified him more than any scream. "You may hold my body captive, but my soul is my own. One day, Alaric, this house will fall. And when it does, it will be by my hand." For the first time, Alaric looked uncertain. Section 10: Till Death Do Us Part. Years later, bards would sing of the fall of House Carowan, though few knew the true story. Elise, now a woman hardened by suffering, played a careful game of survival. She gained allies among the servants and nobles, whispering promises of freedom, subtly sowing rebellion beneath Alaric's nose. When the revolt finally came, it was swift and merciless. Alaric was slain by his own guards, and Lord Cashan's banner burned atop the battlements. Elise stood on the castle balcony, the wind whipping her hair as she held her young son close. "Free," she whispered, tasting the word like honey. "At last." But her triumph was bittersweet. She had survived, yes, and broken her chains, but at a terrible cost. Too many lives had been destroyed, too much innocence lost. As she watched the dawn rise over the blood-stained hills, Elise made a vow to her son. "You will never know the chains I wore," she swore. "You will choose your own path, your own heart." The boy stirred in her arms, and Elise smiled through her tears. For the first time in her life, the future belonged to her, and no one else. Epilogue. In the centuries to come, tales of Elise of Harrowmore would be told as warnings and inspiration. Some spoke of her as a tragic victim, others as a cunning heroine who defied the darkness of her age. But to Elise the truth was simple: she had endured a world that saw her as nothing more than property, and she had survived to become something greater. And though she bore the scars of her suffering, she had carved out a legacy of hope for generations to come. Till Death Do Us Part had been meant as a prison sentence. For Elise, it became a battle cry.